Hello and welcome to Cleanearth. 27 years ago, before the words climate change and carbon neutrality were on everyone's lips, a small group of visionaries in Africa saw a storm on the horizon. It wasn't just about rising temperatures or dwindling resources. It was about the very future of communities, ecosystems, and livelihoods. This is the story of Cleanearth, a story of science meeting purpose, of technology meeting tradition, and of a bold commitment to improve quality of life and safeguard the environment. Not just for today, but for generations to come. Back in the late 1990s, environmental solutions in Africa were rare, often imported, and almost always disconnected from local realities. Cleanearth was born with a radical idea. Solutions must be built in Africa, for Africa. From its earliest days, Cleanearth didn't just talk about sustainability, it rolled up its sleeves. Water systems were built where there were none. Carbon strategies were developed long before they became global business mandates. Communities were not just consulted, they were empowered. Cleanearth's work flows in three mighty currents. First, water management solutions. Imagine a village where clean water flows for the first time in decades, or an industrial plant that now treats its wastewater before it reaches the river. Second, environmental and sustainability solutions. From complex environmental and social impact assessments to resettlement and livelihood restoration, Cleanearth has mastered the art of balancing progress with preservation. Third, clean energy solutions. Picture solar arrays stretching across sunlit plains, factories cutting their carbon footprints in half, and companies achieving true energy independence. These are not abstract goals, they are tangible transformations happening across the continent. One of Cleanearth's proudest moments came from an ongoing beverage greenfield plant project. From the ground up, sustainability was woven into every brick, pipe, and process. Then there's the case of a commercial client needing a cutting-edge effluent treatment plant. Cleanearth delivered, turning potential pollutants into harmless water fit to return to the environment. And in the mining sector, where water is as precious as the minerals beneath the earth, Cleanearth's interventions at various sites ensured that every drop was treated as a resource, not a waste product. It is not just about technology, it is about trust. Cleanearth's clients know that when they partner with this team, they get a blend of rigorous science, deep local knowledge, and a fierce commitment to sustainability. Every project is guided by impact pillars aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This ensures the work not only solves today's problems, but prevents tomorrow's crises. Cleanearth's mission is clear: to improve quality of life and safeguard the environment through sustainable solutions. But behind that mission are people: engineers, scientists, and community leaders, all working in harmony to turn environmental challenges into opportunities for innovation and hope. This is more than a company profile. It is a movement. And as the climate challenges of the 21st century grow, so does Cleanearth's resolve. Because the future isn't something we wait for, it is something we build. This has been the Cleanearth story. Until next time, remember, sustainability isn't just about saving the planet, it is about saving ourselves.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Cleanearth, I warmly welcome you to today's webinar on what does doing ESG right actually mean? We are delighted to have you all with us. To set a tone for today's session, let us now hear a message from our CEO.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this important session on ESG, hosted by Cleanearth. Over the past few years, we have seen ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, move from the margins of business conversations to the very center of how companies are assessed, financed, and trusted. Regulators are tightening requirements. Investors are integrating ESG metrics into their decisions, and customers and communities are increasingly holding companies and organizations accountable. But here is the truth. ESG is not about avoiding risks or meeting compliance. It is about creating resilience, unlocking value, and driving innovation. ESG gives us a structured way to look at our businesses beyond short-term profit and also ask the questions. How do we manage our environmental impact responsibly? How do we treat our people and communities fairly? And how do we govern ourselves with the transparency and an integrity that is desired? At Cleanearth, we've seen firsthand that businesses who embrace ESG strategically are better positioned for long-term growth. They attract the right investments and the trust of stakeholders and build stronger brands. On the flip side, those who ignore ESG increasingly find themselves exposed to risks that they could have avoided. Now, it's important to clarify something. ESG is not equal to HSE. It is not equal to ESS. It is not equal to a CSR. Although all of these are important, ESG goes much further. It brings together the dimensions of environmental, social, and governance dimensions into one integrated framework, making sustainability part of the DNA of a business. Certainly not an afterthought. That is why today's session is so timely, ladies and gentlemen. We are not just here to demystify ESG. We're here to talk about what it really means to do ESG right, strategically, practically, and in a way that creates both business and societal value. So I encourage you to engage fully whilst you're here, ask the questions, and start to think deeply about how the insights you get today can be applied within your own organizations. And so on behalf of the team here at Cleanearth, I want to thank you again for joining us. Together, let us move beyond compliance and conversation into the real work of building a resilient, responsible, and future-ready business all across Africa. Thank you and have a great time here.
Thank you, Echo. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Ms. Deborah Amwe-Ebuah, Environmental and Sustainability Manager at Cleanearth.
Thank you, Rosemary, and a good morning to all of us gathered here today to discuss the theme for today's webinar, what does doing ESG right actually mean? My name is Deborah Amwe-Ebuah, and I lead Environmental and Sustainability Solutions here at Cleanearth. And for today, I'm going to be your keynote speaker, and I would like us all to have our emphasis on the word actually mean, because we are here today to not just demystify, but to also let you understand what you can literally do in your various organizations for you to be ESG aligned or compliant, whatever the case may be. So to set that tone, I would like us to look at this very statement on the screen. It says global, and I quote, global ESG assets are to hit $40 trillion by 2030. Now, this research was conducted by Bloomberg Intelligence, and it tells us that as we make progress 5 years from now, especially, we are going to have much of the financial flows through investments demanding one form of ESG alignment or the other. It is against this need we see showing now and about to be intensified in the next 5 years, for instance, that we are organizing this webinar, which is the first of many to come. And the goal is for today is to, one, to demystify ESG, and two, to present to you a strategic playbook that you can adopt and apply immediately at your various institutions. Now, my objectives, like I said, I would just briefly group them in three. If we demystify ESG, we intend to use shared language and as much as possible remove ambiguity and bring it to zero. Then we will translate it into a strategic investor-ready operating system. And after the webinar, we will go through it and also get it to you after the webinar, a 90-day quick start and a 12-month roadmap you can adopt from tomorrow. So before we go into every other thing, let's look at the first objective to demystify it. What is ESG? Most of us know it as the acronym for environmental, social, governance, and that simply is ESG. But then we need to know also that ESG is a framework for measuring sustainability. So it is the terms environmental, social, and governance are actually giving you directions on which you would be able to measure your sustainability if you say you are operating sustainably. So when we take the environmental dimension, then we are looking at, among other things, one, your resource use, whether it is being used efficiently or otherwise. Then we also look at your emissions caused by your operations. So whether your operations are emitting carbon dioxide or its equivalent, which are greenhouse gases or not. We also tend to look at how resilient your business or operations are in the face of the threat of climate change, whose impacts are being felt across the globe. Ghana and most of the African region suffering the brunt more than others. Then when we look at social, that is a social dimension for the ESG, which is a framework, then we want to make sure that you are at least considering stakeholder equity. You are looking at your community impact, your employees. You are even going to look at your supply chain. You're going to, as far as look at what labor is even going on within your supply chain, that is to say your suppliers or vendors. And on governance, then we want to look at the overall governance architecture of a company or an operation. And so it will include board oversight. We will look at how ethically or not your operations are, transparency. It's also, ESG also allows you to vet your own decision-making structures and then make changes where you have to be. So you realize then that, simply put, ESG can never be equated to corporate social responsibility, which is CSR. It can't also be boxed into health, safety, and environment on its own. Neither can we say ESG is environment and social sustainability on its own. Because for ESG and ESS is you taking steps and measures to either be compliant or aligned, and then ESG is the framework with which you are reporting on these activities. So therefore, we can then say that ESG is literally embedded in strategy, it's embedded in operations, it helps us to analyze our risk, and simply put, we can say that it is how the world measures responsible and future-proof businesses. Now, if you then want to say, okay, I want to be responsible, I want to future-proof my business, or I want to attract funding for all the right reasons that ESG helps you position, you do not want to just walk in blindly. So you want to make sure that you are being specific to your business. And in that case, there is a term in ESG that we call materiality. Now, materiality is you determining what is really impactful on your business, whether financially or on your stakeholders. Because in ESG reporting, it has not much to do with doing what everybody is doing, but rather what is specific to your business, your sector, and in most cases, even your jurisdiction. All of these determines how you go about your ESG reporting. So then we have in the most recent evolving frameworks, we have what we call double materiality. Because in the past, because ESG was used by investors to determine where their finances flew into, or what businesses they invested in, we were looking at how only financial impact, let me put it that way. But now we have double materiality, where we are asking firms, or firms are being asked according to the frameworks, to not just report on what is financially impacting their business, but how their businesses also are impacting people, which includes your employees and stakeholders community, and then the planet, which helps us to look at all the environmental consideration. The reason is that there are a lot of frameworks, and again, there are also different business operating sectors. So for instance, mining is never equal to fast-moving consumer goods companies, nor is it also equal to the real estate sector. So we cannot have everybody towing the same line. Otherwise, we will be having the situation where you put fishes and monkeys in water and judge all of them by the same. So you need to conduct your materiality and then determine which of the frameworks are important to your sector, to your business, to your jurisdiction, and then you move on to report ESG on your ESG report. Now, the outcome of a good materiality assessment conducted is actually a prioritized ESG risk opportunity list that drives, targets, and generates all the advantages or profits that we say that ESG is going to give. Since I talk about the fact that there are several frameworks and you need to be aligned based on your sector, as part of this webinar, we are going to be providing some of the frameworks and give you insights on how you can align based on your sector. Let's look at the global disclosure alignment, where we are looking at what to use and when to use it. So as many of us as may be familiar or not with ESG, you would hear about at least until GRI released an updated one, the most recent ESG framework, which was the IFRS S1 and S2. And IFRS is the International Financial Reporting Standards 1 and 2. These standards talk about the core sustainability and climate disclosures, but then they are investor focused, because that is what current investors, as the global shift is happening, are going to assess where their money flows based on whether your reporting is aligned to these particular standards or not. Then we have the GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, and it helps you to literally focus on your impact on people and planet, on your stakeholders. And so what is actually the practices? People normally use it and pair it with the IFRS one, because IFRS is also focusing on the investors. So that way you get an ESG report that is in a way providing double materiality assessments. And so now you would realize you would have assessed your impact on people, planet, and you would have also assessed your financial impact. Then another disclosure or framework is the TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And as their name implies, they look at climate risk governance strategy and metrics. Now, TCFD is largely embedded in IFRS, especially the S2, which is Standards 2. And so if you are again combining any of the frameworks, then you really need to understand them and know which ones to combine to not give you unnecessary work. Then we look at the SAS one, which is specific to sectors. They provide as much as possible sector metrics. And so if you want to have key performance indicators to gauge your ESG performance and reporting, then you normally pair this with either the IFRSs or the GRI to make sure that your KPIs help you to take strategic decisions, which would give you the full benefits of embedding ESG in your operations. Beyond the global sphere, there are many more on the global sphere, but beyond that, there are also regulations, there are also some frameworks that govern operations in Ghana here and some in Africa. But then if we zero in down on Ghana, we all know about the EPA Act, which is the new Authority Event Act that is passed in 2025 this year. There is also the LI 1652, and all of this cumulatively at least gives you directions on how to conduct your environmental impact assessments, getting your operating permits. It also gives you some direction on monitoring and reporting obligations. We also have the Bank of Ghana's Sustainable Banking Principles outlawed in 2019, which demands for those of you in the financial sectors, demands you to have ESG metrics in your reporting to ensure especially climate-related risk disclosures. Then there is the Securities and Exchange Commission Sustainable Bond Guidelines. And for that, companies especially listed on the GSE, which is the Ghana Stock Exchange, would relate more to it. You also know that if you are going to maintain your listing on the GSE, then you have to have GRI aligned reporting. So that is a clear scenario where you need to go by the Sustainable Bond Guidelines and also by the Global Reporting Initiative. So we are having a global framework needing to be aligned with a local or jurisdictional framework, and you need to be able to marry the two or pair them up to be able to be as compliant as needed. Also in Ghana here, most companies have their own acts and governance codes. And so if you are talking ESG, you would need to pay particular attention to these documents. Then we have the Public Procurement Act 914, which is the amended one, which has ESG clauses in there. And then the National Climate Change Policy. We have also the nationally determined contributions, which are Ghana's commitment to climate change mitigation, submitted to the Paris Agreement on behalf of the country every 5 years. So you realize that these, amongst other frameworks, are there that you would need to be aligned with for not just impactful reporting, but to be able to turn your business around or get the full benefits of being ESG compliant that we ESG practitioners or sustainability practitioners keep telling you about. On the regional scale, of course, we have the IFC performance standards. If you want to take some sort of facility from them to undertake a project or business expansion, then you would need to be aligned to some of this. We also have the Equator principles. We have the World Bank EHS guidelines, amongst others. But then if your ESG is going to work, whether it is the plan or the framework, then you need to have that governance that works. Because even for those who have almost equated ESG to HSE practitioners will tell you that when you come up with all the plans and all the modules, if you do not get a high level buy-in, then you are barely going to make an impact. It is the same for ESG and even worse. Because we say that ESG must be embedded in strategy, in literal operations to be able to get us where we want to be. So for ESG to work, you need a governance that works. And if you are looking for literal ways to get your governance to work, then you want to look at your board mandate. What is the mandate for your governing board? And what are their skill sets pertaining to ESG? If the skill set is not there, then you want to be able to organize some form of trainings in your company to be able to build their skills, to be able to bring them up to speed. And you would also want to set up KPIs for your governance board that you will link it to their benefits and allowances. That is one way to get governance to act. Another way is to also set up a committee within the board or at that level that reports directly to the board, or you can have both, because if the board do not have the technical skills or understanding, then they are not likely to make any meaning out of whatever committee that you set up and build their capacity with. After you look at the board, you also want to look at your management architecture. Is your company's management ESG inclined? Are they the data owners? And do you have cross-functional forum or platforms available for teams to be integrated and then work together? Because from our first slide, you realize that we are not just looking at the environmental considerations. We are looking at social impact. We are looking at governance. So you need that space for people to work together. Then after you have been able to address your management architecture, you want to look at your suite of policies as an organization. What does your code of conduct say? Is it addressing the social concerns in the ESG dimensions? What does your HSE policy architecture or implementation framework say? What about anti-bribery policy? Do you have something like that, or whistleblower? What about the standards you have set for your suppliers? Because if you are doing everything right, But then when auditors come to audit your ESG reports, they find out that your suppliers are non-compliant. Everything they do is just out the window, leading to a lot of emissions, and they also have, let's say, child labor on their premises, or their employees are not well taken care of, or they do not have proper governance systems or architecture that is transparent, that upholds the ethics, that uphold good ethics. Then it may be like you are working, but then your suppliers are dragging you back. So you want to even look at whether you have standards for your suppliers to meet or not. Beyond that, you also want to set up your own internal controls. So you look at your audit cadence, you look at management review, you look at RACI, all of that. When you have all of these in place, then you can say that you have set up a governance architecture that literally works when we talk about ESG. And so for that, globally, if you want some principles or frameworks that you can look at to guide you in setting up the governance architecture, then you can look at the OECD principles. You can also look at the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. There is ISO 3701 anti-bribery. In Ghana here, we have the Companies Act, Act 992. We have the Bank of Ghana and SEC Corporate Governance Codes. We have our own Whistleblower Act that you want to at least embed in your activities, and many more. And so if we have taken care of governance at that broad level, let us scale down the frameworks according to some select sectors. And so if you take, for instance, the financial sector, in whatever financial capacity that you're acting, then on the global scale, you can zoom in on TCFD. We mentioned it earlier on, and then the ISSB standards, for instance. We can also zoom in on the Equator principles, green bond principles at the global level. And where you want to look at the local laws, then you definitely do not want to miss out the Bank of Ghana's SBPs 2019, nor do you want to miss out the SEC's Ghana Guidelines Sustainable Bonds 2021. Now, this matters because ESG disclosures now shape credit and investment flows. So if you are working in finance for any organization and you would need some credit, or you would want to attract investors to your company, then you want to make sure that every decision or strategic move you make for the company is aligned to some of these frameworks. Also, financial institutions themselves are getting pressure to make sure that their lending as well is aligned. So as if you are working in finance where you are even the lender in this case, then you also want to make sure that as a professional, you have made yourself abreast with some of these principles, some of these guidelines, so you are aligned and you are able to screen properly your clients or lenders. You can build capacity through training, either self-learning or bringing in someone to train yourself and team periodically. Then we also look at the procurement sector. If you are in procurement, what should your concern be with this whole ESG frameworks? On the global scale, you want to look at ISO 20400, sustainable procurement. You also want to look at GRI 308 and 414. There is also the IFC performance standards that can give you some direction, some insights on how to approach things. And from a Ghana perspective, you can look at the Public Procurement Authority Act, especially the amended one, so you do not miss Act 663 and also the amended Act 914, so you do not miss out on anything. For EPA, of course, there are EIA regulations for your suppliers and then your contractors or subcontractors. So where you have had to outsource part of your operations or a project you need to undertake, whatever the case, as procurement people, you want to make sure that those who bid and throughout the project implementation, these regulations are adhered to. It helps in your ESG positioning and reporting it, and it also helps you to avoid fines, suits, and all the social disgruntledness that normally happens from projects. This matters to you procurement people because supply chains are the largest ESG risk sources that we have currently. And now we look at if you are in sustainability or E&S management or in a decision-making portfolio, after looking at the broader governance framework, then on the global scale, you want to pay attention to some standards. Among the GRI standards, you want to look at SAPs, you want to look at clean development protocols, you want to look at the ISO 1401 2015, which is the EMS. You want to look at the IFRS S1 and S2. So you want to be abreast with all of these standards, at least to an appreciable degree, so that you are able to provide on the spot support to your clients or to your teams or to management for them to be able to make credible decisions. And then in the Ghanaian space, of course, you cannot do away with EPA, their permitting requirements, the LIs, and every other thing. And if you are in mining or extractive, for instance, then you even want to also concern yourself with MINCOM regulations and the rest. Again, if you are in mining or extractive, and then you may be within a certain jurisdiction, then you also want to align because your company may be a multinational whose parent company may be sitting in Europe. So then you want to be aligned with the ESRS, right? So the point I'm trying to drive home is that ESG is sector specific, it has to be, and it also has to be jurisdiction specific, considering all other stakeholders, which include your investors, which includes your staff and employees, which includes your clients, which includes the communities that you operate in and adjoining communities if your operations have an impact on them. Another nice act you can look at is the Renewable Energy Act 2011. Also, Ghana has a renewable energy transition plan, which is going to drive what we do in our energy space going forward. So you want to look at it. And then lastly, you also want to be abreast with what climate change policy is saying, because when you are acting outside of the countries or the jurisdictions alignments, then you may be setting yourself up for some sanctions, some form of regulatory breaches, and you do not want all of that. As a sustainability person, you have to make sure that all these risks at least are taken care of on behalf of your company, and these are some resources that can help you be on your way. So let's just delve straight into what I term the strategic playbook, where we break things down even further and try to be as literal as possible. And I'll start that with a 90-day ESG quick start, right? So if you woke up tomorrow or today right after the webinar and you are looking for a quick start where to start from, then this framework can give you some quick starts on what you do and where you can enter from where you sit. So from day 1 to day 30, you want to at least establish your baseline. You can do quick data scan, identify what data you have and do not have. You can conduct quick materiality. And in this case, do not forget that it has to be one financial materiality and then impact materiality, where you are looking at the impact on your finances and then you are looking at the impact on people and planet. Then you identify what the compliance gap list is. You list them out and then you move on to the second phase, which would be days 31 to 60, where you now set targets to try and meet the gap list that you identified. For that, you can pick top 5 KPIs. You can draft their policies or pilot supplier screening. For instance, you are now learning that it's as important for your suppliers to be as aligned as you may be aligning your operations. So you can also do that within the day 31 to 60. And then in the last phase, which is day 61 to 90, you move to disclosure, where you can come up with one-page ESG fact sheet. This fact sheet will be made possible because don't forget, on days 1 to 30, you had made a quick data scan and you are documenting your processes as you moved on. You've identified your KPIs, you've drafted where you thought policies needed, you've done perhaps a pilot supplier screening. And so you are able to come up with the results, which can be just a one-pager ESG fact sheet, or you can move on to, based on your organizations, you can move on to updating the board or to developing an action plan for the next thing. And to make this 90-day ESG quick start easy, you can use tools such as spreadsheets, you can use existing ERPs that you have, but the goal is to keep it very lean and practical. You do not have to go over and beyond the immediate start. Then when you are done with that, like I mentioned in the 90-day quick plan, you can have now an action plan. Now your action plan, you can take time to develop it into a full 12-month roadmap where you are now going to operationalize your ESG intervention and potentially scale it. So in the first quarter, you now want to have a sit down, look at your governance architecture that we described earlier on, whether it is aligned. You want to look at your policies, your data model. You want to look at something like a first assurance ready metric. So you develop some metrics. And in all of this, before I forget, let me add that it is important to engage relevant stakeholders along the way, because that's the only way your metrics can be assured. In the second quarter, you want to look at your supplier ESG onboarding. For instance, now you've developed some standards or criteria for your suppliers to follow to make sure that you are not doing all the work as an organization while your vendors drag you back. So you can look at onboarding them, you can look at visiting their sites and conducting audits. You can look at energy, water efficiency projects or efficiencies on their sites. In the third quarter, you can delve into climate and environmental and sustainability risk scenarios. You can look at your CAPEX plan, conduct trainings, issue out incentives, because some companies can, for instance, an incentive can be the most ESG compliant staff for the month or something like that, to try and get your staff even aligned. And then your stakeholders, your suppliers, you can decide that you would list the vendors, and then you have the ESG aligned ones and the non-aligned ones. And whenever you have need for their products and services, priority would be given to those who are aligned. That's also an incentive in the opposite direction that works. And in the fourth quarter, you want to look at externally disclosing all of the things that you've put in place. And that's when we say you have done your sustainability report or your ESG report. For that, based on your internal controls, you can even bring in a third party to assure your processes and your data. And then you generate, I personally advise, and that's what we do at Cleanearth here, to have dual phase reporting, where one is your reporting that shows up in your operational and financial report, and then the other is an investor-facing report that should be able to get investors who are ESG inclined, which the majority are now, to look your way should they be looking for ways to fund businesses or projects in the country. And so I would not just end at that, but we are also providing what we are calling a KPI library. And for this, you get to choose what is material. Again, we should not forget that material means what is relevant to your business, be it financially or to the people and planet that are operating or within which you operate your businesses. So you get to pick any of these KPIs or even bring on some more based on your operations. And if you look at the environment aspect, you can look at your carbon emission intensity. You can look at your energy use percentages. What percentage of renewable integration do you have on site? What is your water intensity? How is your waste managed, or is it diverted? Are you diverting waste from the landfill through some in-house initiatives that is reducing how much waste you would have generated in a business as usual scenario? Another thing is if you took the social wing or dimension of ESG, then like I mentioned, if you even focus on screening suppliers, you want to look at whether perhaps due to your intervention, you want to look at whether there is wage equity. You also want to look at maybe gender parity or otherwise. You want to look at how many training hours even that after this period, you realize you needed to train your staff. So how many training hours you conducted for staff, for vendors, for contractors. All of that can be KPIs that you can measure yourself against to feed into your reporting at the end of the year, grievance or redress mechanisms. And then if you take the governance bit, then you look at how much your board is independent. It's the KPI that you can use. You want to look at whether you've even conducted anti-bribery and corruption trainings for them and for key decision makers in the company, or for identified hotspots where corruption, bribery is likely to take place. You also want to look at whether people are allowed to disclose findings, whether people are allowed to disclose, or the whistleblower, let me use that one, whether people are allowed to do that. You also want to look at what your audit findings are. Now, what I give as a pro tip is that always pick up an absolute metric, pair it with intensity, and then give it a target owner. So, for instance, what do we want to do? We want to say that for my company, let's assume I am running a cosmetic company where we are into production, okay? And I want us to look at our water use. So I carry water as an absolute metric. Then I add intensity. So I want to look at how much water we are using and how much we are going to be able to save based on our interventions. And then I am going to assign a responsibility. So in my organization, for instance, I may have operations manager being the responsible person. And by the time we are done, we expect him to have monitored and be able to give us raw data that we can use to report on our ESG standing in that regard or otherwise. Data is coming up a lot, and so some may be wondering what the data architecture and assurance should look like. And for that, I have just these 4 key areas that we can look at to at least help us get there, to say our data architecture is well planned and that we can easily get it assured even by third-party verifiers or auditors. One, you want to make sure that your data owners are mapped to your operations or processes. So we are looking at ops, we are looking at HR, we are looking at finance, for instance, we are looking at procurement. There is not one central, let's say, sustainability person who must generate the data for all these places. No. You identify what you need to be able to be compliant or aligned, identify where the sources of those data should be, and then map them to it, assigning responsibility in our previous slide, don't forget. Also, if you need evidence trails for when there is a third-party verifier or assurer, some very, very easy low-hanging evidences that you can use are invoices, your utility bills, your logs, way bills, your version control and retentions. You do not have to discard all of them. All of these provide a very good source of data for ESG reporting. You also want to conduct on-site checks where you move in and do spot audits. You also look at the variance analysis when you remember the water example. So for that, we were saying that we are going to check how much my cosmetic company was using and then how much is being saved after we put in a particular intervention or the other. In that case, you are conducting an independent assurance scope yourself. And my advice is to document as much as you can along the value chain. All these processes, you would have to document a lot because that is what's going to help you to be able to have that proof if you have a third-party verifier or assurer or an assurer. You also want to, as much as possible, create some dashboards. It can include a simple key performance indicator scorecard, and then you can escalate exceptions monthly. So you are getting the data fed on a live basis. And if there are any wild variations, you can escalate it to responsible persons. Don't forget you have mapped the data owners over here. Then you get it done to be able to make sure that your ESG, when the time is due, is done and it is done right. Because we do not just wake up and report. It's actually an entire process that we are going through on this very webinar. Now, after you've been able to develop your data architecture, you are able to assure it through the processes and systems you put in place. How do you identify your risks and then your opportunities? For instance, if you take, you can heat map top 10 risks, and then you create a matrix for them where you have, let's say, the likelihood, the probability for that risk occurring, and then the impact of that across environmental, social, or governance. That is any of the arms of ESG. And then when you are done with that mapping, you would also look at how you can mitigate it. That is what we are calling the opportunity lens. There, in that vein, it can include efficiencies, it can include improving efficiency, and so checking at savings in that regard. It can also include new markets, because if, for instance, an identification is that a product that you have on your shelf is not likely to sell, and that may impact social, for instance, or your finances, for instance, then a mitigation intervention can include identifying new markets that you can penetrate. You can also look at another opportunity lens, which can be concessional finance, depending on, again, the problem that you identify during the mapping of your top 10 risks. And when that is done, you integrate that into your corporate risk ledger register. If you do not have that, you can create one, or you can also add it to investment committee papers. That should then be escalated to relevant decision-making parties so that we can make sure that our activities or interventions are not just sitting on the shelves. That is the only way to translate them into real and tangible. So if we narrow it down again to the sectors that we spoke about earlier on, if you are in finance, you want to check your investment readiness, or if you are handling finance. So in that case, what do the lenders check? One, they would look at your governance architecture, they will look at ENS risk, they will look at how resilient or not you are to climate change, and then they will look at what you are disclosing, because ESG demands transparency. So if you are not transparent, you are not likely to get lenders bringing in money. And then if you were going for green or sustainable linked loans and bonds, then they would be interested in, amongst other things, the use of proceeds, what your KPIs are, and then how or what you need to be able to be verified. Now, the advantage that making sure that you align give is that for investors, when they are looking at your disclosures or your documents, is that you have lower risk premium when your controls and your data are credible. So that is why you would first put in the data architecture and assurance. Then for procurement lens, now if you're a vendor, and you are wondering what firms or organizations that are ESG aligned would be looking for when they are procuring their vendors, then you want to be able to ensure that ESG clauses are embedded in your policies and are implemented. You also want to demonstrate your supplier due diligence tiers, and also flag your own high risk categories. You also want to have scorecards and corrective action plans. So ESG does not mean that everything should be perfect. It means I have sat down with myself, identified these risks, potential risks and challenges, and these are the processes that I am taking to mitigate them. that still forms part, all right? And so you also want to know what your clients or who you are seeking to become a vendor to, what their disqualifiers are for severe breaches. Now, for sustainability and then ENS, if you said you were sustainable, you had a robust ENS system, then amongst other things, at least we would be looking at how aligned or not you are with EMS, which is the ISO 14001 2015. We would be looking at incident and corrective action loops. What are the loops? We would also be looking at the performance standards, labor, community, health and safety, biodiversity, as well as the stakeholder engagement plan. What is the grievance redress? How do you track to closure? So if you're in sustainability or ENS in any organization, you want to make sure that the organizations are aligned or leaning towards these particular areas. Again, as we look at the broader sector alignment or what each sector is expected to do, let us look at literally, if I take, for instance, manufacturing, what are some of the ways that, or what are some of the hotspots that I can map out, if you remember our risk and hotspot mapping, and then what can I do to take care of that? So take manufacturing. A hotspot can be water use, wastewater, your energy intensity, or packaging. Now, quick wins, very quick ones that you can implement to try and get you to be on your way, can be heat recovery. You can look at leak reduction. You can look at effluent treatment plants. You don't have one, you get one. If you do have one, you look at optimizing it in case there are leaks anywhere. You can also quickly look at your supply chain, your EPR, your recycled content, auditing your suppliers, logistics efficiency. Now, in mining and extractive, some key hotspots include tailings, water stewardship, land and community security, and then you can introduce controls which would or should focus on at least biodiversity, because we know how intensive mining is and extractives. You can also look at resettlement action plan as controls or quick wins where you've identified some of your hotspots to be community aggression. You can also look at incident readiness. You audit your system, map out all the potential incidents that can occur on site, and then you look at how ready or not we are. Now, clear-cut opportunities that exist in this very space is having renewables on site, looking at improving the efficiency of your fleet. Some mining companies now are already importing in Ghana hybrid systems. You also look at your local content programs. What if you were in real estate or the infrastructural sector? Some quick hotspots include building energy, water fixtures, construction waste, health and safety. And in controls, you can look at whether you are aligned with the green building codes. You can look at when you are commissioning, you can look at operation and maintenance, and pick opportunities that you can integrate to ensure that you are aligned. Includes having a hybrid form of energy where you have part reliance on the grid and then part reliance on, for instance, solar or other forms of energy. You can look at smart metering. You can look at rainwater harvesting for some of your landscape activities or even the actual construction work. And then what if you were in the water sector or wastewater sector specifically? Then you can look directly at your design, what you are inputting into designing your systems even. You can look at the flow, the loads, variability, your discharge standards, and technology options exist. A lot of them. We have the MBR, you have reuse, you can look at the O&M requirements and institute technological options that are more friendly, that are more environmentally, social, governance friendly. And for measuring yourself, you can look at your performance, uptime, how long the plant stays up or gets a downtime, how often you are getting a downtime, because either of the two impacts your sustainability agenda as much as possible. Then you also want to look at energy use per meter cube. You want to look at how you are handling your sludge, and then quality assurance, quality controls in your laboratory analysis. What if you were focusing on carbon to account for it, to manage it, or to develop carbon projects? Then you want to look at a key document that would come up in this is the GHG protocol. And as much as possible, you look at all scopes, all emission scopes 1, 2, and 3. You set a boundary. You look at what the emission factors are, what are causing your emissions, and then how you are going to remedy it. And then you develop an abatement hierarchy, which is the second table. And for that, the hierarchy is to avoid. Where you cannot avoid is to reduce. Where you are unable to reduce, alternatives or switches. And if none of this is going to work, we look at offset. So in carbon management, offsetting should actually be the very last resort and not the first thing to do. And for every stage that you have tried to implement an intervention, you document it as you go, because all of that helps with your data assurance and verification processes. For project opportunities in carbon management, we look at ones that improve efficiency. We look at solar cook stove, we look at the RED Plus. What you just need to do is to conduct due diligence. You need to determine why and where you are sending the projects, and then make sure that you are in line with what the requirements are. So in very brief 5 points, you realize that to implement your ESG interventions, 1, you have to diagnose, which is setting your baseline. Remember the quick data scan, quick audits. You determine whether it is important to your company financially, or whether it is also important to your stakeholders, and then the planet, people and planet. Then you move on to designing or the compliance gap, addressing the compliance gap. You remember that one as well. And so there you set targets where you need policies, you develop them. Then the third thing to do is to deliver on what you have designed. Then by the fourth stage, you are disclosing all of your interventions. And like I said, based on your internal controls, the fifth step is to bring in third-party verifiers or assurers to vet your process, to recommend improvements where necessary. And so then we can look at third-party audits, amongst others. And at this point in the webinar, I would just dedicate about 3 to 5 minutes to what I am terming a live case clinic. For that, what we are going to do is, having walked through what ESG is, what we can literally do based on our sectors to at least get us started. This particular part of the webinar is just to get any volunteer at all, mention your sector or where you are from, and then let us work together to develop, at least try and determine how to do our baseline setting, at least try to determine what remediation or mitigation activity that's like certain targets, and then we can just briefly learn what to do to implement it. So do we have a volunteer? You just raise your hand and then you would be unmuted to volunteer. No volunteer means that we have all understood the process, and then we would be able to implement it when. Okay, so there is a question saying, can we repeat the live case requirements? So the live case requirements is just for someone to volunteer and say, look, I work in this space or this area. How can I get started on my baseline? Just one quick point or 2 quick points, and we'll provide that information or data to you to be able to implement it when you get off the call, in case you have to. Or you can just text what sector you want us to look at in the comment section in case. Right. So we have a volunteer that says, I work in plastic manufacturing. How can I just start my baseline, or what we call it? So if you go to the slide before this, we go through the 5 step process. One, we said to diagnose, set your baseline, and then materiality. So in plastic manufacturing is quite broad, but so I'm going to try and use the broader sense of things. I would presume that you are using some chemicals, you are using water. So let's again focus on water, for instance. If it's a manufacturing plant, you are going to have some form of aerosols or fine particles going out in the air. We can also decide to look at noise in case you want to consider environmental scenarios. Again, we can look at what your labor policy or HR policy says. So there's another question, but let's deal with the first person soon, and then if we have time, we take the second person. So you can look at, for instance, your employees or your factory hands, your factory floor workers. What are the policies that you have put in place for them? And that will move under the social architecture. If we take the social architecture under ESG, one thing you can identify is whether there is even some form of health insurance or health coverage for them. It's one way to tell your story on how you are fostering employee well-being, for instance. And then if you take, so then you have identified your baseline, assuming in that case that the factory floor workers, the factory hands do not have any form of health insurance coverage. So that has been identified as a baseline. Now, let's determine whether it is material to your business or not. Why should you be concerned? When these employees take ill, are they supposed to fund it with their own money? Yes and no. So in this case, in identification or problem case diagnosing, we realize they are supposed to fund it with their own money. What this can translate is that employees say, I do not have, for instance, the funds right now to see a doctor. I'm waiting till end of month. And that is going to literally translate into reduction in productivity. Now, reduction in productivity means reduction in man hours on your plants. It also means reduction in outputs or products getting onto the market. So you realize that one, it impacts you financially, literally in how much you produce, because you may not be able to meet customer demand, buyer demands. And then two, it even impacts you, the double materiality in this case, it impacts your employees, because then you are going to have disgruntled employees on why management should be covered and why I should not be covered simply because I'm a factory. So you have done that baseline diagnosis, and then you design a target. Your target does not have to be overly ambitious. In ESG, we do not overly promise. So it can be as basic as, say, get first year level or basic insurance coverage for at least 40% of our staff. And then you start from there. So you have developed that target, you have determined the intensity, 40%, and then you assign responsibility. So in your company, who is supposed to ensure this? Perhaps it is the HR department. So you assign responsible person, HR. And now we expect that, so you have that timeline. Get health insurance cover for at least 40% of factory hand workers by this timeline. The next thing is for the one you assigned, the HR person, to deliver on it. Now, when the timeline is up, it's up to the HR to say, look, we had 1,000 staff, and now about 300 of them are on the insurance. We are working to enroll some more. That literally translates to 30%. Okay, so you realize that you get the data, and when you do things right like that, through diagnosing it, you do not have to conjure data, you do not have to find data out of anywhere. The process itself gives you the data. And in your disclosure, when you are disclosing your sustainability ESG report, it becomes just straight up for you. Should a fee step happen where someone has to assure or verify it, again, you have all of these processes already documented in the beginning, and then it's easier to determine. So that is how we can literally walk into this, pick a wing of ESG, set targets, diagnose a problem, design a target, deliver it, and then disclose it. And that will bring us to the end of our live case clinic, because we are almost getting ready to wrap up, and we want to give room for question and answer, so we move on. And so thank you very much. There is the person just said it is very clear, and we are happy that you understand what it means to do ESG. So from what we have said so far, you can see that doing ESG means, one, move from words to action, not just praise the words. Two, set your policies or your standards or your targets, let them be very clear and not ambiguous. Three, embed it in your processes. So now HR has it embedded in our live case scenario, has it embedded literally in their processes and strategies. And if you were able to report in the first year that you were even able to move from 0 to 30%, you realize that there is morale to set even higher targets the following year. And so just like that, getting that particular KP, getting that particular activity done has been added to the HR department's KPI. And also doing ESG means to track your performance, to measure it, and then to report it. Then you say you have done ESG. And so if you have done ESG, what does doing it right mean? To move, we are now moving into wrapping up. And so for that, I have just 7 attributes that you can keep checking yourself against to see whether you are doing it right or not. 1, it has to be authentic. It has to be real, not some abstract something like our live case scenario. 2, it has to be material. That is it relevant to your operations, to your sector, to your jurisdiction? 3, is it aligned to the relevant frameworks? 4, is it integrated? Have you embedded it into literal operations, or can you embed it into literal operations and decision making? 5, are you measuring it? Do you have KPIs? Is the data consistent? Can an independent person walk in and then there is everything aligned for them to verify or otherwise? 6, is it impactful? Now, if 30% of your staff are now on health insurance coverage and you are reducing man time, then you literally have an evidence of change. So when you do ESG right, getting the data and mapping the data to evidence becomes just a process that you just follow. The result is already there, and you do not have to think or conjure reports or sustainability positions and what have you. It does not have to be difficult if done right. Again, and the last attribute I would want you to remember is whether it is adaptable or not. Now, for adaptability, whether what we are doing is responsive to evolving regulations and stakeholder demands. Because in Ghana, for instance, IFRS S1 and S2 is about to be mandatory in January 2027, according to the ICAG. So if you are currently reporting with GRI, are you making sure that you are at least using the transition window that we have right now to form some form of alignment towards the regulatory shift that seems coming? And those are my 7 attributes that you should work with. Now, if you are wondering what your stakeholders would see as good ESG score, 1, at least you have credible plan with interim targets. Your board oversight can be ascertained in minutes. Remember when we have identified whether we even needed training for board and all of these are documented. It's just a matter of going into the archives and then producing it. Your metrics can be assured. Again, remember our data architecture and assurance. Your suppliers are improving. You have fewer incidents. Remember the live case scenario. And when you do all of that, you also get financial advantage because you have successfully done your due diligence and you have improved your terms of operation. Now, if you do ESG right, what is in it for you as an organization? One, you get better access to finance. Two, you reduce your risk and your vulnerability to climate, sometimes even in legal scenarios, because then you are not getting a lot of suits because you are aligned with your stakeholders, the communities, and the jurisdictions within which you operate. You have also reduced your supply chain risks. Third, you have improved reputation and stakeholder trust, because when the stakeholders come, we've learned what they would look out to ascertain credibility, and it is all there if you did it right, so you have that trust. And when all of these are put together, it gives you a competitive edge in global markets. And so I would like to end today's keynote presentation by reminding us that doing ESG right means literally embedding authentic, material, measurable practices into the DNA of our businesses. And when that is done, we can be assured of the delivery of real impacts and then long-term value, rather than just some compliance checklist or some paper we think we are showing out there. It literally translates to value for the business and organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Deborah, for this insightful presentation. We now open the floor for your questions and reflections. Please share them in the chat or raise your hand. I'll call you. So we have a question from Jifa, and then followed by Joseph.
Okay. So my question to you, Deborah, is, from your experience, what is the single biggest misconception companies have about ESG, and how can they overcome it?
All right. Thank you, Jifa, for that question. The single biggest misconception, I like to call it a 3-in-1. Companies assume that ESG is, those who follow me on LinkedIn know I keep championing that as well on my LinkedIn page. Companies are assuming that ESG is HSE or ESG is corporate social responsibility, or that ESG is the same as having conducted a single impact assessment. And when you do that, you have done ESG. What this has literally translated to companies, in my experience, is that they have been unable to unlock the full value for embedding ESG in their operations, in their strategies. And so it turns out to look like a cost item for them rather than a value driver or something to give them an advantage or a competitive edge in business.
Joseph, let's hear your question, please.
Right. Thank you now for your presentation. It has been a very insightful and impactful one. So my question, a lot of organizations, they do recognize the importance of ESG. So sometimes it feels abstract. It feels massive. It feels abstract. They feel like probably they don't have the resources, they don't have the restructuring process, or they don't have a dedicated department. So my real question is, how can organizations like public sectors, private sectors, practically start weaving ESG into existing operations in a way that feels manageable and sustainable? Would they find it overwhelming? And if not, how can they overcome the overwhelming nature of ESG into their existing operations and structure? Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for that question, Joseph. And I completely agree. ESG, in my experience, has felt overwhelming for most companies when you have to talk about all the frameworks and what have you. But a quick entry point for companies that I have been advising so far and has been working for them is to use that diagnostic tool that we had on this webinar, the processes start from baseline or diagnosing the issues one after the other. It doesn't have to be all of it at the same time, nor do you need to start from finding out what framework it is and then getting all confused or overwhelmed by seeing everything or the text or write-up of the framework. So you start first by identifying or determining what your current situation or baseline is, diagnose it. Then we move on to setting our targets, which are clear, which normally are mitigation activities like interventions that are coming to remedy what you identified. Then you move on to aligning or assigning responsibility, and then you can move on to delivery or impact. So whoever has been assigned responsibilities, it's their job to get that particular target met. And then you can move on to report. So you realize when you use that quick guide, it no longer becomes overwhelming because the data, like I said, and the reporting and everything you need is already developed along the way, one after the other. So what industry are you in? Are you in extractive? Are you in manufacturing? Are you in mining? Are you are you an industry? Are you a hotel or a school? What are you? You establish that. Where are you in? So you are in Ghana or wherever else you are. What will the stakeholders demand? Your communities, the countries, or the jurisdiction? Are you into agri-export? If you are exporting, you also want to consider, for instance, the region within which you are exporting your produce, because then they also have their requirements, like I said, that you have to meet up, otherwise your produces are rejected. So it's a matter of taking it step by step to be able to make sure that you are not overwhelmed. Now, when all of this is done, for some companies, you'll be saying that you do not even have someone in-house to help you to even start this process I'm talking about. You can build capacity, or you can identify some stuff and then build their capacity, bring in people to build their capacity, and then they take it from there, or you get help at least for the very first process. And for instance, here at Cleanearth, when we step in to assist firms, we literally build their staff capacity alongside the work. We don't just come in as consultants to demand, give me this, give me that, and then we get the report and we are out. We let you identify stuff. We build your capacity along the way. So by the time we are exiting the scene, you are able to take it up in-house and then continue from there.
Thank you very much. That certainly answers my questions. We will take it step by step till we get to that process. Thank you.
We will take one more question from Rachel. Rachel, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. And the presentation was really insightful and impactful. I learned a lot from this as a natural resource graduate trying to work things out. So my question is about offsetting. You made mention of offsetting, that is the last resort when it comes to ESG. But I want you to highlight on it, because imagine a company that comes to pledge that, okay, by 2030, we are going to reduce a lot of emissions we do in our company. And they make such pledges that, okay, we are going to plant trees to absorb a lot of carbons and all that. And it happens that they've come to give all these pledges, but how are we going to check the credibility of what they are saying? Is it just they saying it for the outsiders, or how does ESG measure the credibility of such offset pledges? That's what I want to know. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Rahel. And you are bringing up a key point, a key reason and driver for which organizations should be interested in ESG and doing it right. Because as we can hear from Rahel, you realize that even consumers are getting the more interested and are deciding on which firms or brands they want to even purchase from based on their commitment or otherwise to ESG. So for one, you, the organization one, that is why ESG is not in making pledges or promises. It's actually in determining real, tangential, or material aspects or a materially impactful solutions or challenges to your business, and then coming up with mitigation strategies. Okay, because when you hear from Rahel, ESG is not me coming up to declare that, look, we are going to reduce emissions to the tune of 56,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide is equivalent. Making that declaration is not ESG. ESG is whether you have reduced. So for you as a consumer, Rahel, what you want to find out in their sustainability report, and in the future, we will have a webinar on sustainability reporting. What you want to find out in the company's sustainability report is what they have done, not what they have promised to do. Because more often than not, what we are seeing are pledges just being announced on very, very nice glossy reports. And then the following year, we see the same pledges again. All right. Then the next year, we are seeing the same pledges again. So as a consumer, most companies actually do publish their sustainability reports. You want to look at it. You want to check on what they have done, what they have identified to be challenging, and what they will do to mitigate it. So you are not interested in broad-based, we will reduce or we will plant 1 million trees. Why are they planting the 1 million trees? If an organization is not able to tell why or for what reason they want to plant 1 million trees, then they are not doing ESG, they are greenwashing. Because if the 1 million trees cannot be linked, whether financially, as a financially material component of your business or impact material component of your business, then you are just giving a hoax or just greenwashing. So you as a consumer want to make sure that they've detailed why they are saying they will plant a tree. And you as a company, for organizations that are on this call, you are realizing that we cannot just be up and then make promises and assume that that is ESG. Investors and then consumers are increasingly seeing through the greenwashing. And so now is the time to do things and do it right.
Thank you very much.
Right. On that note, we want to wrap up because we are within the time exactly. So on behalf of Cleanearth, thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you again at our next session. Just a quick takeaway here. We will share the ESG Quick Start checklist. That is the 90 days or the 12-month roadmap. We'll share it in the chat box, so you can click on it and follow us on that message. And then we are also happy to inform you that we are offering 30 minutes free consultation for participants to review their ESG starting point. So get in touch with us at info.cleanearthsci.com. On that note, we have come to the end of the session. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.